Some people don't leave when things are bad. They leave when things get hard. There's a difference. Bad times can pass. Hard times reveal who someone really is. And sometimes the person who once promised to stand beside you forever is the very first to disappear when the weight of life becomes inconvenient. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back and realized that the moment someone walked away from you was actually the moment your life quietly began changing for the better, even though it didn't feel that way at the time? Because when it happens, it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like loss. It feels like betrayal. It feels like standing alone in a storm, wondering how you're going to survive the next hour, let alone the next year. This is one of those stories. A story about a man who walked away when life got hard, and a woman who didn't chase him, didn't beg, didn't fall apart in front of the world. She waited, not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet patience. And years later, when he wanted back in, he wasn't ready for who she had become. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention when she walked into a room. She didn't speak loudly or try to impress anyone. But there was something steady about her, something grounded, the kind of presence you only notice once it's gone. She was in her mid-50s, with gentle eyes that had seen both joy and disappointment. She had lived in the same modest home for nearly 30 years. The paint on the porch was fading, the mailbox leaned slightly to one side, and the old oak tree in the front yard had watched her entire adult life unfold. This was the house where children once ran through the hallway, where holiday dinners were loud and messy, where laughter filled the rooms until it didn't. For 27 years, she shared that house with her husband, Thomas. Thomas Carter had always been confident, the kind of man who spoke with certainty about the future. When they first met, he talked about plans, success, stability. He made it sound like life was something you could control if you just worked hard enough. They married young, back when promises were easy to make and consequences felt far away. For a long time, life followed the script everyone expects. Jobs, bills, routines, responsibilities. Children grew up, time moved forward, and although it wasn't perfect, it felt solid. Until it wasn't. Life didn't fall apart all at once. It never does. First came the job loss. One afternoon, Thomas came home earlier than usual. Too early. His lunchbox was still full, and there was something in his face that Evelyn had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, something closer to fear. "They're downsizing," he said. Downsizing. Such a small word for something that rearranges your entire life. They tightened their budget, cut back where they could, and told themselves it was temporary. People their age had been through worse, after all. They would figure it out. Then Evelyn started feeling tired, more tired than usual. Doctor appointments followed, tests, waiting rooms, conversations spoken in softer voices, until one day the doctor leaned forward slightly and spoke in that careful tone no one ever forgets, the kind of tone that tells you your life is about to change. Evelyn needed treatment, long-term treatment, the kind that demands energy you don't have, time you can't afford, and money you don't know where to find. Suddenly, the future Thomas had always talked about with confidence felt heavy and uncertain. At first he tried, or at least it looked like he did, but then something shifted. He stopped going to appointments with her, stopped asking how she felt. Conversations became shorter. Silences grew longer. He spent more time away from home, more time alone with his thoughts. Evelyn noticed, of course she did. But she didn't accuse him. She didn't argue. She believed in patience, believed that fear could make people pull inward, believed that marriage meant staying, even when things weren't easy. She told herself, he's just overwhelmed. But there's a difference between being overwhelmed and being gone. One evening, after dinner had gone cold on the table, Thomas finally said it. "I can't do this anymore." No shouting, no drama, just a quiet statement, as if he were talking about a chore he no longer had the energy for. "I didn't sign up for this," he added. Those words landed harder than anything he could have yelled. I didn't sign up for this. As if illness was optional, as if love came with conditions, as if 27 years could be undone with one sentence. Evelyn didn't cry right away. She just looked at him, looked at the man she had built a life with, and realized she no longer recognized him. He packed a bag that night. Not everything, just enough. Enough to leave, enough to convince himself this was temporary, enough to avoid fully facing what he was doing. At the door, he hesitated, for just a moment, long enough for hope to flicker. But he didn't turn around. The door closed, the house fell silent, and Evelyn sat there, listening to the clock tick louder than it ever had before. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it comes without yelling or slammed doors. Sometimes it walks out politely and leaves you with all the pieces. That night, Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't call anyone. She didn't beg him to stay. She went to bed alone. The next morning, she woke up at the same time she always had, made her coffee, opened the curtains, took her medication. She didn't call Thomas, didn't leave messages, didn't ask friends where he had gone. Instead, she made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a bold one, a quiet one. She accepted what had happened, not because it didn't hurt, but because denial wouldn't heal her. She told herself, if I'm going to survive this, I have to move forward, even if I don't know how yet. And so she did. Slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing at first. The months that followed were some of the hardest of her life. Treatments drained her strength. Finances tightened. Nights felt longer without another person in the house. But something unexpected began to happen during those quiet years. Evelyn began to discover herself. Not the version of herself who existed as someone's wife, but the woman she had quietly set aside while building a life for others. She learned how to manage everything on her own, asked questions she'd never asked before, took control of things she'd once assumed Thomas would always handle. And in the stillness of that house, something powerful began forming. Meanwhile, Thomas believed her life had stopped. He told himself she would always be there, waiting, weakened, grateful if he ever returned. He had no idea what was happening in her absence. And years later, when his own life began to unravel in ways he never expected, he would think of Evelyn again, the woman he walked away from, the woman he assumed had stayed the same. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that her patience had been doing something extraordinary. And when he finally wanted back in, he wouldn't recognize the life standing in front of him. Time has a strange way of revealing things. At first, it moves painfully slow. Every day feels heavier than the one before. But then, without warning, you look back and realize months have passed, then years. For Evelyn, the first year after Thomas left felt endless. There were mornings she woke up reaching for the other side of the bed before remembering no one was there. Evenings where the quiet felt so loud it pressed against her chest. Moments when she almost picked up the phone just to hear a familiar voice before reminding herself why she didn't. And yet, something inside her stayed calm. Not numb, not cold, just steady. People assumed she was barely holding on. A few neighbors offered sympathy in hushed tones. Friends checked in, expecting tears, expecting anger, expecting bitterness. But Evelyn surprised them. She wasn't dramatic about what happened. She didn't speak badly about Thomas. When asked where he was, she simply said he chose a different path. That was all. No explanations, no accusations. And that quiet response confused people, because most of us are taught that strength looks loud, that healing requires constant talking, that moving on must be announced. Evelyn didn't believe that. She believed healing was something you did privately, like letting a wound breathe. During that first year, she focused on what she could control. She organized paperwork she had ignored for years, learned the details of bills, insurance, investments, sat at the kitchen table late at night with reading glasses perched on her nose, teaching herself things she once assumed she'd never need to know. At first, it was overwhelming. Have you ever opened a drawer you avoided for years only to realize how much you didn't understand was inside? That's what it felt like. But instead of shutting it again, Evelyn kept going. Little by little, fear turned into familiarity. Confusion turned into confidence. And confidence, real confidence, doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly. Meanwhile, Thomas was telling a different story. To friends, to distant relatives, to anyone who would listen, he framed himself as the one who had been trapped, overburdened, forced to make a difficult choice. He talked about stress, about needing space, about how life had become too heavy. What he didn't talk about was Evelyn's calm strength, or the way she never begged him to stay. That detail bothered him more than he realized, because deep down, part of him expected guilt, expected anger, expected proof that she couldn't manage without him. Instead, he got silence. And silence has a way of making people uncomfortable. As time passed, Thomas moved on, or at least tried to. He lived in smaller apartments, took short-term jobs, chased distractions that made the days feel full, but the nights feel empty. Life wasn't falling apart for him yet, but it wasn't improving either. Back at the house with the oak tree, Evelyn's life was changing in subtle ways. Her health stabilized. Not perfect, but manageable. She learned her limits, learned when to rest and when to push forward. And something unexpected happened. She found joy again. Not the loud, carefree joy of youth, but something deeper, more grounded. She began volunteering at a local community center, just a few hours a week at first, helping with paperwork, offering a listening ear. People noticed her, not because she tried to stand out, but because she listened. She had a way of making others feel understood without ever oversharing her own pain. And slowly, opportunities began to appear. A part-time administrative role turned into a paid position, then more responsibility, then leadership. Evelyn didn't chase recognition. She simply showed up, and people trusted her because she was consistent. Here's something worth asking yourself. Have you ever noticed how the people who endure the most quietly often end up holding the most influence? Not power that shouts, power that steadies. That was Evelyn. Years passed. Thomas heard bits and pieces through mutual connections, that she was doing okay, that she was keeping busy. He told himself that meant survival, not success. He assumed she was still living cautiously, still limited, still waiting. He never imagined she had built something entirely her own. Then life got hard for him. Not all at once, just like before. A job fell through, then another. His savings dwindled faster than he expected. People who once welcomed him stopped calling, and the confidence he used to rely on faded. One evening, sitting alone in a dimly lit apartment, he thought of Evelyn. Not with guilt at first, with nostalgia. He remembered the steadiness of her presence, the way she handled crises without panic, the way she made life feel anchored. And for the first time, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him. What if leaving had been a mistake? He brushed it off at first, but the thought returned again and again until eventually it became a question he couldn't ignore. Would she still be there? Years earlier, he had walked away believing doors could always be reopened. Now he wasn't so sure. Evelyn, meanwhile, wasn't thinking about Thomas at all. Her days were full, her evenings peaceful. The house felt different now, not empty, but intentional. She had redecorated, simplified, removed things that reminded her of a life she no longer needed. And one afternoon, while sorting through old documents, she came across a file she hadn't opened in years. Financial records. She paused, not with anxiety, with clarity, because she finally understood them, and what she realized in that moment changed everything. She hadn't just survived abandonment, she had quietly positioned herself in ways Thomas never expected, ways that would matter deeply when he finally showed up again. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. Not just yet, because before Thomas could knock on her door, life had one more lesson to teach him. And before Evelyn revealed what she had built, she would be tested in a way that forced her to choose between silence and truth. And when that choice came, nothing would ever be the same again. It started with a message, not a call, not a visit, just a message. Evelyn noticed it on her phone late one afternoon while the sun slanted softly through the living room window. She had just finished tidying up, the kind of small, ordinary task that now brought her a quiet sense of peace. The name on the screen made her pause. Thomas. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Not with anger, not with excitement, with curiosity. It had been years, long enough for habits to change, long enough for wounds to scar over, long enough for her life to settle into a rhythm that didn't include him. She didn't open the message right away. Instead, she set the phone down and went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. She moved slowly, deliberately, gave herself time. Have you ever noticed how moments like this feel heavier than they should? A single message, a few words, and suddenly years of memory press in all at once. When she finally sat back down and opened it, the message was short. "I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing well." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of how he left. Just a gentle tap on a door he once slammed shut. Evelyn read it twice. Then she smiled, not because she was happy, but because she understood something Thomas didn't. He was reaching out because life had stopped cooperating with him, and for the first time since he walked away, she held the power of choice. She didn't respond that day, or the next, not out of spite, not to punish him, but because she no longer felt rushed. Back when he left, everything felt urgent. Survival demanded immediate action. Fear pushed every decision. Now, she had time. Meanwhile, Thomas waited. He checked his phone more often than he wanted to admit, told himself she was busy, told himself silence didn't mean rejection, but doubt crept in, and with it, regret. He began replaying the night he left, the words he used, the way she didn't argue. At the time, her calm had made it easier to go. Now it haunted him. Finally, after several days, Evelyn replied, "I'm doing well. I hope you are too." Nothing more. No warmth, no coldness. Just truth. Thomas felt relief reading it. Relief and something else he couldn't quite name. Hope. They exchanged a few more messages over the next couple of weeks. Light, careful, surface level. He asked about her health. She answered honestly, but briefly. She asked how he was. He said things were Complicated. That word again. Complicated. It had always been his favorite way to avoid specifics. Eventually, he suggested meeting for coffee. Evelyn hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she knew this moment mattered. She agreed. The cafe was small and quiet, neutral ground, public enough to feel safe, private enough for conversation. Thomas arrived early. He looked older. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. The confidence he once wore so easily now sat unevenly on his shoulders. When Evelyn walked in, he stood up instinctively. And for just a second, he looked surprised. Not because she looked different, but because she didn't look broken. She carried herself with ease, calm, assured. They sat across from each other, exchanging polite conversation at first. Weather, traffic, small things. Then silence settled between them. Thomas cleared his throat. "I've missed you," he said. Evelyn nodded slightly. "I'm sure," she replied. Not unkind, just measured. He shifted in his chair. "I made mistakes," he said finally. "I wasn't in a good place back then." She listened, without interrupting. He talked about stress, about fear, about feeling overwhelmed. He didn't say sorry, at least not yet. And Evelyn noticed that too. After a pause, she spoke. "I understand fear," she said calmly. "What I didn't understand was abandonment." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. They landed anyway. Thomas looked down at his coffee. For the first time, he realized this conversation wasn't going the way he expected. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't pleading. She was steady. And steadiness made him uncomfortable. He tried to steer the conversation toward reconciliation, toward familiarity, toward the idea that what they had could be picked up where it left off. Evelyn didn't shut him down, but she didn't encourage him either. When the meeting ended, he walked away feeling unsettled. Something had changed, and he couldn't tell what it was. Over the next few months, Thomas made more effort. Calls, messages, occasional lunches. He spoke about regrets now, about wishing he'd handled things differently. Still, something was missing. Ownership. Evelyn noticed, and she waited, because patience had taught her something important. People reveal their true intentions when they believe time is on their side. Thomas believed he could ease his way back into her life. He didn't realize Evelyn had already decided something crucial. She just hadn't told him yet. Meanwhile, life continued to open doors for her. Her role at the community center expanded. She was invited into planning meetings, asked for input on larger projects. She accepted with grace, never mentioning her personal life, never seeking validation. And quietly, behind the scenes, she made decisions that secured her independence completely, financially, emotionally, legally. Thomas had no idea. He assumed her calm meant openness. But calm can also mean closure. And one evening, after another polite dinner, Thomas finally said what he'd been circling around for months. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we could try again, slowly." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, she knew the time for patience was almost over. Because the truth she carried, the truth about what she had built, what she controlled, and what he had lost, could no longer stay hidden much longer. But before she revealed it, she needed to hear one thing from him. And whether he said it or didn't would change everything. Evelyn didn't answer Thomas right away. When he said, "Maybe we could try again," the words hung between them longer than he expected. He shifted in his seat, waiting for a response that didn't come. She wasn't playing a game. She wasn't trying to make him uncomfortable. She was thinking. Because once certain words are spoken, you can't take them back. And once certain truths are revealed, there's no returning to the version of the relationship that existed before. She took a sip of her tea and set the cup down carefully. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Thomas nodded quickly. "Of course." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes didn't leave his. "Why did you come back?" The question landed softly. No accusation, no edge. Just curiosity. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. He laughed lightly, the way people do when they need a moment to organize a half-formed answer. "Well, I've had a lot of time to think," he said. "About us, about what we had." She waited. "I realized I'd never stopped caring," he added. Evelyn nodded once. "That's not what I asked." He shifted again. "I mean, life hasn't gone the way I expected," he admitted, "and I guess I started thinking about what really matters." She let the silence stretch, because silence invites honesty if someone is willing to sit in it. Thomas wasn't. "So you came back because life got hard?" she asked gently. The question wasn't sharp, but it was precise. He frowned slightly. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she replied. For the first time since they reunited, something flickered across his face. Defensiveness, discomfort. "I left because I was overwhelmed. You know that." "Yes," Evelyn said, "and now you're back because you're overwhelmed again." The words settled between them. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and sighed. "I just thought, after everything, maybe we could start fresh." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Fresh starts usually require honesty," she said. That night, after they parted ways, Thomas felt unsettled in a way he couldn't explain. He had expected resistance, expected emotion, expected maybe even anger. What he hadn't expected was clarity. Evelyn wasn't confused. She wasn't stuck in the past. She was grounded in the present. And that made him nervous. Over the following weeks, Thomas tried harder. He brought up memories from their early years, stories from when life felt simpler, when they laughed more, when the future felt certain. Sometimes Evelyn smiled at those memories, but she didn't cling to them. There's something unsettling about talking to someone who remembers the past but doesn't live in it anymore. And Thomas began to sense that he was no longer the anchor in her life. One afternoon, he asked her directly, "You seem different," he said. She considered the word. "I am," she replied. "In what way?" She paused. "I'm not afraid anymore." That answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended, because fear had always been the thing he assumed connected them. Fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of being alone. He had expected to return to a woman still navigating those fears. Instead, he found someone who had already walked through them and come out the other side. What Thomas didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to ask, was how Evelyn had managed to build such stability on her own. Because during the years he was gone, she hadn't just survived, she had prepared. After the initial shock of abandonment, Evelyn had taken stock of her life with a level of honesty she had never allowed herself before. She looked at what she owned, what she controlled, what she relied on, and she made changes. She consolidated accounts, updated documents, consulted professionals, asked questions she once thought were unnecessary. Not because she planned for Thomas to return, but because she planned for him not to. Independence wasn't an act of rebellion for her. It was an act of respect for herself. And in that process, she discovered something surprising. She had been far more capable than she ever gave herself credit for. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to struggle. Jobs came and went, relationships never lasted. People expected more from him now than he was willing to give. And slowly, subtly, he began leaning on Evelyn emotionally, calling her when things went wrong, asking her advice, seeking reassurance. She listened, offered thoughtful responses, but she never rescued him. Have you ever noticed how people who abandon responsibility often expect comfort without accountability? Evelyn noticed. And she remembered. One evening, after a long phone call where Thomas vented about another disappointment, she said something that changed the tone entirely. "Do you remember what you said when you left?" she asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know," he said cautiously. "It was a long time ago." "You said you didn't sign up for this," she replied. He sighed. "I know. I regret that." "Do you?" she asked. "Or do you regret the consequences?" Silence. That silence told her everything. From that moment on, Evelyn understood that Thomas hadn't come back because he had changed. He came back because she had, and he sensed it. But sensing strength isn't the same as respecting it. That realization came on a quiet afternoon when Evelyn received a call that forced her to make a decision she had been postponing. The caller was a legal advisor she had worked with over the years, someone who had helped her restructure things after Thomas left. They spoke briefly. When the call ended, Evelyn sat still for a long time, because what she now knew would inevitably affect Thomas, and whether he stayed or walked away again would depend on how much truth he could handle. That evening, Thomas suggested dinner. Evelyn agreed, but this time she chose the place. Not the cafe, not neutral ground. Her home. The house with the oak tree. Thomas arrived early. Standing on the porch, he felt something he hadn't expected. Unease. The house looked different, maintained, intentional, alive. When Evelyn opened the door, she welcomed him calmly and let him inside. He glanced around. "This place feels different," he said. "It is," she replied. They sat at the table where so many meals had once been shared, the same table where he had eaten dinner before telling her he couldn't do it anymore. And as they sat there again, Thomas sensed that something important was about to happen. Evelyn folded her hands and looked at him steadily. "There's something you need to know," she said. Thomas straightened in his chair. Because in that moment, he realized this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about reckoning, and whatever Evelyn was about to say would change his understanding of everything he thought he could return to. Thomas sat across from Evelyn at the familiar table, but nothing about the moment felt familiar. The house was quiet in a different way now, not the hollow silence he remembered from the night he left, but a settled kind of quiet, the kind that comes from order, not absence. Evelyn didn't rush. She had learned that people who rush truth often do it to soften it. She wasn't interested in softening anything. "There are some things that changed while you were gone," she said. Thomas nodded, though he wasn't sure what she meant. "I assumed as much," he replied carefully. "I know you had to adjust." She met his eyes. "No, I didn't just adjust. I restructured." That word landed differently. Restructured. He shifted slightly. "What do you mean?" Evelyn stood and walked to a small cabinet along the wall. She opened it and removed a thin folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just organized. She placed it gently on the table between them. Thomas stared at it as if it might explain itself. "When you left," she said, returning to her seat, "I realized something important. I had spent years assuming stability meant partnership. I was wrong." He frowned. I don't... I let you finish, she said calmly. Please let me finish. He nodded. I learned how to manage everything. The finances, the legal responsibilities, the decisions I once thought were shared but really weren't. She slid the folder closer to him. You can open it if you want. He hesitated, then did. Inside were copies, titles, statements, documents neatly labeled. His eyes scanned the pages. His brow tightened. "What is this?" he asked. "Clarity," she said. Over the years, Evelyn had made choices, quiet, careful choices. She had updated ownership structures, rebalanced accounts, protected assets. Not out of anger, out of wisdom. Thomas looked up slowly. "You changed things," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I secured my future." He swallowed. "I assumed, since we were married for so long—" "We were married," she corrected. "You ended that when you left." He closed the folder. "I didn't realize," he said quietly. "That's the problem. You never realized much of what I carried." The words weren't cruel. They were honest. Thomas leaned back, processing. "So what are you saying? That I don't fit into your life anymore?" Evelyn took a breath. "I'm saying that my life no longer depends on whether you stay or go." That sentence changed everything. He felt it. People often confuse calm with weakness. Thomas had made that mistake years ago. Now, sitting across from Evelyn, he realized how wrong he had been. She wasn't calm because she was fragile. She was calm because she was prepared. "And if we were to try again?" he asked cautiously. She tilted her head slightly. "Then it would have to be on entirely different terms." "What kind of terms?" "Honest ones," she said. "Accountable ones." He nodded slowly. "I can do that," he said quickly. But Evelyn noticed the speed of his answer. Speed often signals fear. "Before you say that," she said, "there's more." She stood again and walked to the window, looking out at the oak tree. "This house," she said, "is no longer shared property." He looked up sharply. "What?" "I refinanced it, paid it off. It's mine." The words echoed. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. He had assumed, without ever asking, that some things would always remain open to him. This wasn't one of them. "And the community center?" he asked, trying to ground himself. "I oversee operations now. I don't just volunteer." He was quiet. She turned back toward him. "Thomas," she said gently, "you came back expecting familiarity, comfort, a place to rest." He didn't respond. "I built something while you were gone," she continued, "not to prove anything, but to survive, and then to thrive." There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know you were capable of all this." She smiled softly. "Neither did I." That was the truth, and it stung him more than anger ever could. He realized then that he wasn't returning to a life he once knew. He was standing outside a door he no longer had the key to. Still, he wasn't ready to let go. "I still care about you," he said. "I believe you," Evelyn replied. "But caring isn't the same as commitment." He looked down at the folder again. "I wish I had stayed," he admitted. "That's not the same as wishing you had supported me," she said. Another silence. And then, quietly, he asked the question that revealed everything. "So, what happens now?" Evelyn folded her hands. "Now," she said, "I decide whether there's room for you in the life I built without you." The words were final. Not cruel, final. Thomas nodded slowly, his face unreadable. But inside, he felt something shift, because for the first time, he understood the cost of walking away, and he feared that cost might be permanent. As he left that night, stepping off the porch into the dark, he glanced back at the house. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a place he had once belonged to and lost. Inside, Evelyn locked the door and leaned against it briefly. Not in sadness, in closure. She knew the next conversation would determine everything, because the truth wasn't fully revealed yet. And when it was, Thomas would have to face not just what he left behind, but what he could never reclaim. Thomas didn't sleep much that night. He told himself it was the coffee, the conversation, the unfamiliar feeling of standing on the outside of a life he once assumed would always be his. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid, not of losing Evelyn again, but of realizing he never truly had her the way he thought he did. The next few days passed slowly. He replayed their conversation over and over, searching for signs he might have missed, moments where he could have said something different, done something better. But every version ended the same way. Evelyn had changed, and not in a way that could be undone with apologies. Still, Thomas wasn't ready to accept it. People who walk away often believe they can return because they mistake absence for pause. He decided to try again, this time not with nostalgia, not with emotion, with logic. He called Evelyn and asked if they could talk. She agreed. They met again, this time during the day. Sunlight filled the room, making everything feel more exposed, less forgiving. Thomas sat down and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About honesty, accountability." She nodded. "I want to be part of your life again, not because I need something, but because I want to contribute." Evelyn studied him quietly. "What does that look like to you?" she asked. He hesitated. "Well, we've known each other most of our lives. There's history, trust." She tilted her head slightly. "Trust," she repeated. "That's interesting." He frowned. "Why?" "Because trust doesn't disappear overnight," she said. "It erodes." He shifted uncomfortably. "I know I hurt you," he said, "but people change." "Yes," she replied, "they do." And then she added something he wasn't prepared for. "But change is proven by behavior, not words." Thomas felt a familiar frustration rise. "So what are you saying? That I'll never be enough?" Evelyn shook her head. "I'm saying I no longer measure my life by who stays." That sentence struck deeper than she intended, because Thomas suddenly understood something that unsettled him. He wasn't competing with another man. He was competing with her peace. And peace is a difficult thing to replace. He tried one last approach. "What if we start small?" he suggested. "Shared dinners, helping around the house, being present." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "This isn't a trial period," she said. "It's a boundary." The word landed firmly. Boundary. Something Thomas had never taken seriously. "I think you're being unfair," he said, his voice tightening, "after everything we've been through." Evelyn didn't react. She waited. Then she spoke. "Unfair would have been asking you to stay when you didn't want to," she said. "I didn't do that. I let you go." That stopped him. "I rebuilt my life," she continued, "without asking you for help, without blaming you, without chasing you." She leaned forward slightly. "I won't undo that now to make you comfortable." The room felt heavy. Thomas realized this wasn't about convincing her. It was about accepting a truth he had avoided for years, that leaving had consequences. Not loud ones, not immediate ones, permanent ones. Still, he asked the question that had been forming in his mind since the night at the table. "Is there someone else?" he asked quietly. Evelyn smiled softly. "No," she said. "There's just me." That answer hit harder than jealousy ever could, because it meant he wasn't being replaced. He had been outgrown. Silence filled the room again. Thomas finally stood. "I think I need time," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Take all the time you need." He paused at the door. "I never thought you'd be okay without me," he admitted. She met his eyes. "I didn't either, until I was." After he left, Evelyn sat down and let out a slow breath. Not relief, resolution. She knew now that whatever happened next, she would not lose herself again. But Thomas wasn't finished yet. Days later, he made a discovery that shook him more than any conversation with Evelyn ever had. While speaking with an old acquaintance, someone connected to the community center, he learned something he hadn't known. Something about Evelyn's role. Something about decisions she had influence over. Something about her quiet authority. And suddenly, pieces began to fall into place. Her calm, her confidence, her refusal to bend. It wasn't just emotional strength, it was position. And in that realization, Thomas felt something twist inside him. Because the woman he walked away from wasn't just surviving, she was leading, and he had been absent for all of it. When he realized exactly how much power she now held and how close he had once been to it without knowing, his regret turned into something deeper: panic. Because what Evelyn had built wasn't just a life, it was a legacy, and he was no longer part of it. But before that truth fully settled in, Thomas made one final decision. A decision that would force Evelyn to reveal everything she had kept private. And once that happened, there would be no turning back. Thomas swallowed. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know," she replied. "But impact matters more than intent." Thomas didn't go back to Evelyn right away. Instead, he went searching, not aggressively, not openly, just enough to confirm what his pride already suspected. He spoke to people he hadn't spoken to in years, asked casual questions framed as concern, listened more than he talked. And what he learned unsettled him deeply. Evelyn wasn't just involved at the community center, she was essential. She oversaw budgets, approved programs, had final say in decisions that affected dozens of families. People trusted her judgment because she never used it carelessly. They spoke of her with respect, not sympathy. That distinction hit Thomas harder than anything else, because sympathy implies weakness, respect implies strength. And the woman he left behind had earned it quietly. The more he learned, the more embarrassed he became. Not because she had succeeded, but because he had assumed she wouldn't. That assumption had shaped every choice he made since leaving, and now it was unraveling. Still, Thomas believed there was one angle left: history. Surely the years they shared meant something. Surely effort counted for something. He asked Evelyn to meet one last time. She agreed. They met in the early evening, the light fading outside the windows. This time, Thomas didn't try to soften his words. "I know what you've built," he said. Evelyn nodded. "I know how much influence you have," he continued, "how people rely on you." She waited. "You didn't have to do all this alone," he said. "I could have been there." Evelyn looked at him carefully. "But you weren't," she said. The simplicity of the truth left no room for argument. "I want to make this right," he insisted. "We could still—" She raised her hand gently. "Thomas," she said, "do you want me or do you want access to the life I built?" The question stopped him cold, because for the first time, he realized he didn't know the answer. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Evelyn continued. "When you left, you taught me something," she said, "that I could not build my future on someone else's courage." She leaned forward slightly. "I had to build it on my own." Intention. Another pause. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "There's something else you should know." He stiffened. "When you left," she said, "I updated my will." His breath caught. "And my beneficiaries." He stared at her. "I made sure the people who stayed were protected." The words felt heavier than any accusation. Thomas felt his chest tighten. "You removed me," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I had to." He laughed once, softly, not out of humor, out of disbelief. "You were that sure?" he asked. "I had to be," she said. "My life depended on it." That was the moment he understood. Not intellectually, emotionally. He wasn't being punished, he was being excluded. And exclusion is the consequence of absence. The conversation ended without anger, without raised voices, without reconciliation. Thomas left knowing something had shifted beyond repair. Meanwhile, Evelyn felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the fragile kind, the earned kind. She had spoken her truth without bitterness, she had protected her future without apology, and for the first time since Thomas left, she felt completely free of his shadow. But the story wasn't finished yet, because life has a way of completing its lessons. Weeks later, Evelyn received news that tested her resolve. A situation at the community center required a decision that would ripple outward, a decision involving funding, leadership, and accountability, a decision that would indirectly affect Thomas. And when he learned about it, he would finally see the full scope of what he had walked away from, and the realization would come too late. Because once patience has done its work, there is no undoing its results. The call came early in the morning. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight just beginning to filter through the window when her phone rang. The number was familiar, someone from the community center's board. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding, occasionally closing her eyes as details were explained. When the call ended, she didn't move right away. She already knew what the decision would have to be, not because she wanted power, but because responsibility had chosen her long ago. A local initiative, one that supported job placement and retraining for older adults, had reached a crossroads. Funding had been mismanaged under previous leadership, and the board needed to restructure quickly. New leadership, new oversight, new standards. Evelyn had been asked to lead the transition. She accepted. Not with pride, with purpose. What she didn't know yet was how closely this decision would intersect with Thomas's life. Thomas had been struggling more than he admitted. The jobs he took were temporary, unstable. He needed something steady, something connected to people he knew. When he heard about the initiative reopening under new leadership, he felt a flicker of hope. Community-based, familiar environment, a chance to regain footing. He applied. He didn't list Evelyn as a reference. He didn't mention their history. Part of him believed it didn't matter. Another part hoped she wouldn't be involved. When his name came across Evelyn's desk, she paused, just briefly. No rush of emotion, no satisfaction, just recognition. She reviewed his application carefully, the same way she reviewed every other one. Experience, gaps, inconsistencies, promises without proof. Later that week, the board met to discuss final decisions. Thomas's name came up. Someone asked if Evelyn knew him personally. Yes, she replied. The room went still. Can you remain objective? Someone asked gently. Evelyn met their gaze. I have been preparing for this kind of responsibility for years, she said. Objectivity is part of that. No one questioned her further. When the decision was finalized, it was unanimous. Thomas would not be offered a position. Not because of personal history, but because he lacked the consistency and accountability the role required. When Thomas received the rejection, it hit him harder than expected. At first, he was angry, then confused. Then something deeper settled in. Understanding. He requested a meeting. Evelyn agreed. They sat across from each other once more, but this time the roles felt unmistakably different. I didn't know you were involved, he said quietly. I didn't hide it, she replied. He nodded. I see that now. He hesitated. Was it because of us? He asked. Evelyn shook her head. No, she said. It was because of patterns. He looked at her. The same patterns that made you leave? She added gently. He exhaled slowly. I guess I never realized how visible my choices were, he said. She nodded. They always were, she said. You just didn't feel the consequences until now. That truth settled between them. Thomas looked tired. I really thought I could come back, he said, that things would fall into place. Evelyn's voice softened. Life doesn't punish us, she said. It reflects us. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Thomas stood. I'm glad you're okay, he said. I really am. She believed him. I am too, she replied. When he left, Evelyn felt no triumph, only completion. The lesson had arrived exactly when it was meant to. Later that evening, Evelyn sat on her porch beneath the oak tree, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She thought about patience, how people mistake it for waiting. But patience isn't waiting. It's working quietly while others assume nothing is happening. It's building strength where no one is looking. And when the moment arrives, it speaks for itself. Thomas had wanted back into a life he once abandoned. What he didn't realize was that life had moved forward without him, and it had done so with grace. But the story wasn't quite over yet, because the final lesson, the one that lingers longest, was still ahead. And it wouldn't be spoken aloud. It would be lived. After that meeting, Evelyn didn't think much about Thomas anymore, not because she was forcing herself not to, but because he no longer occupied space in her daily life. That's how you know healing has finished, not when pain disappears completely, but when someone stops being central to your thoughts. Her days returned to their familiar rhythm. Morning light through the kitchen window, a quiet cup of coffee, the gentle routine of responsibility and purpose. At the community center, things began to change. Programs stabilized. People who relied on the services noticed the difference. There was less confusion, fewer last-minute emergencies, more trust. Evelyn didn't take credit. She rarely spoke about leadership. She spoke about consistency, and people followed her example. Sometimes during slower afternoons, she found herself thinking about the years right after Thomas left, the uncertainty, the fear, the quiet nights when the future felt like an unanswered question. If she could speak to that version of herself now, she wouldn't tell her to be strong. She would tell her to be patient, because patience had been the bridge between pain and peace. One afternoon, a woman at the center, around the same age Evelyn had been when everything fell apart, sat across from her, hands trembling slightly. "I don't know how you do it," the woman said. "You seem so steady." Evelyn smiled gently. "I didn't always feel this way," she said. "But you didn't give up," the woman replied. "No, I didn't give up on myself." That difference mattered. As weeks turned into months, Thomas faded further into the background of her life. Occasionally, she heard updates through others. He had moved again, taken another temporary job, still searching for something stable. She wished him no harm, but she no longer felt responsible for his outcome. That chapter had closed. One evening, as Evelyn sorted through old photos, she paused on an image from decades earlier. Her and Thomas, younger, smiling, full of certainty. She studied the picture for a moment. Then she placed it back in the box, not with sadness, with acceptance. Life hadn't betrayed her. It had redirected her. And sometimes redirection is mercy in disguise. She realized something else, too. The betrayal that once felt like the worst thing that had ever happened to her had been the doorway to the strongest version of herself. Not because pain makes us better, but because choice does. She chose patience over bitterness, preparation over panic, self-respect over desperation, and those choices had quietly shaped her future. On a warm afternoon, sitting beneath the oak tree, Evelyn reflected on how life teaches its lessons. Rarely through speeches, rarely through confrontation, usually through time. Time reveals patterns. Time exposes intentions. Time rewards consistency. Thomas had believed he could return because he misunderstood time. He thought it paused when he left. It didn't. It moved forward, quietly, steadily, without him. And Evelyn had moved with it. She stood, brushed off her hands, and went inside as the sun began to set. The house felt like home in a way it never had before, not because someone else was there, but because she was fully present in her own life. And that presence, that quiet authority, was something no one could take from her. Still, one final truth remained, a truth that deserved to be spoken clearly. Because stories like this aren't just about one woman or one man. They're about anyone who has been left behind. And what comes next is the lesson that lasts. Years later, when Evelyn thought back on everything that had happened, she no longer measured her life by what she had lost. She measured it by what she had learned. Loss had once felt like failure, like proof that she hadn't been enough, that she hadn't tried hard enough, that something about her had been lacking. But time has a way of stripping those thoughts down to the truth. And the truth was simple. She had not been abandoned because she was weak. She had been abandoned because someone else lacked the courage to stay. That distinction changed everything. Evelyn understood now that when people walk away during hard seasons, they aren't rejecting you, they're revealing themselves. And what they reveal is not something you're meant to chase, it's something you're meant to outgrow. She never spoke publicly about Thomas, never told her story in full detail, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't need to prove it. Her life spoke for her. The quiet consistency, the calm authority, the way people trusted her without hesitation. These weren't things she built to impress anyone. They were the natural result of choosing patience over panic. And patience, she learned, is not passive, it's active endurance. It's showing up when no one is watching, making decisions without applause, building foundations while others assume nothing is happening. Most people mistake patience for waiting, but waiting does nothing. Patience prepares. That was the lesson Thomas never learned. When he walked away, he believed life would hold his place, that the door would remain unlocked, that familiarity would always welcome him back. What he didn't understand was that life doesn't pause for absence. It continues. And those who remain, who stay, who endure, who adapt, grow in ways that can't be undone. Evelyn never wished Thomas harm, but she no longer wished him closeness, because closeness requires shared courage, and courage can't be borrowed. On quiet evenings, she would sometimes sit beneath the oak tree, watching the world slow down as the sun dipped low. She felt gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity that followed it. Because without the betrayal, she might have stayed small. Without the loneliness, she might never have discovered her strength. Without being left behind, she might never have stepped fully into her own life. There is a strange freedom that comes when you stop hoping someone will return and start trusting yourself to move forward. That freedom doesn't shout. It settles. And once it does, you never confuse love with dependency again. You never confuse patience with weakness. And you never mistake someone's absence for your inadequacy. If you've ever been left when life got hard, if someone walked away when you needed them most, let this story remind you of something important. Their leaving does not define your ending. What you do in the quiet years afterward does. Because the strongest transformations happen when no one is watching. And by the time someone realizes what you've become, you no longer need their approval. You've already moved on. And that is the power of calm patience, the kind that changes everything.